Yeah, I opened my eyes this morning, still a little groggy. I realized I don't have a watch. And then I started putting two and two together in my head, and I realized that at some point during the course of the night, D&D Speed Shop must have come through and robbed my freaking watch. Now, you can't trust Canadians, you can't trust people who rely on clickbait for views. But then I realized I don't have a watch. I've never worn a watch. I guess it wasn't them. But as long as I've got you here, let me tell you a story about an engine, about a job, one that changed my life and actually brought me to where I am today doing this YouTube thing. So for this, we got to go way back. And this is my home shop. And for my entire life, I've had a home shop of some sort. I got thrown out of school when I was 16, and I went right to work as a mechanic, working on my neighbor's cars. Simple stuff, oil change, tune-up, brake jobs, that sort of thing. And over the course of time, it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until finally I was running full-service shops out of my various houses here and there. And the thing about that was that over the course of time, I tried commercial shops. I had a few of them. But after a year or two, I realized I really miss the relationship I had with my customers when I ran a home shop, and I miss the freedom. Because when you run a home shop and there's no overhead, well, it leaves you a lot of time. I was generally able to make my day's pay before lunch, so that left me the rest of the day to play around with hot rods and drag racing and everything else. And it's one of the reasons I was able to do as many things as I was able to do. Having a home shop kept me from ever having a job. Freedom. So, to make a long story short, I was happy. Like, I've always identified, even today, I don't identify as a YouTuber, I identify as a mechanic. When I was a writer, I used to identify as a mechanic. It was a mechanic that wrote magazine stories. Now I'm a mechanic that does YouTube videos. But I've always considered myself to be a mechanic. So, this started in the 70s and then through the 80s. And I was, technology was moving along. The cars were getting a little more complicated. They were getting a little, away from the basics. But, I stuck with it. It was no big deal. It's paying the bills, and I'm happy as a mechanic. So, we go up to about 16, 17 years ago now. And like I said, regardless of what business I was in, I always maintained my home shop. So I had a couple of coffee houses. Those were my night businesses. And during the day, I turned wrenches. And one day, I get a car come in. It's a 97 Explorer. And this is one of my customers, one of my local customers. And the truck only had like 50 or 60,000 miles on it. But the dealer wouldn't touch it under warranty. And they had gotten some ludicrous prices on doing a timing chain on it. This is a 4.0 Explorer. And I'm like, I've done tons of 4.0 engines, Ford engines. And it's a happy little engine. This is the Cologne V6. It's a 60-degree V6. It goes back to 1960 or 61, 62. But it's been in all over the world. It's been in countless cars. It was in zillions of Ford Tauruses and stuff like that. So I worked on a bunch of them. I rebuilt a couple. And I even had, at one point, I had a 93 Ranger. It was a 4.0, 5-speed. This thing was fantastic. I loved that truck. So, timing chain on an Explorer, on a 4.0, and they want like some stupid amount of money, like $1,500 to do this timing chain. No problem, man. Bring it. I get you done for $200-300. Well, biggest mistake I ever made, because I wasn't aware that at some point Ford decided in its infinite wisdom that push rods weren't good enough for this engine. This engine that was never ever going to see more than like 5,800 RPM needed overhead cams. And it needed not one, not two, but 3 timing chains. It was ridiculous. So I do this job, and I lost my shirt on this job, because I'm the type of person, if I give you a price on a job, right, I don't change it up. I estimate it to the highest that I think it's going to be, and then that's it. I stick with that. And if I lose money, I lose money. And I lost my shirt on this job. It was ridiculous. And I'm saying to myself, working on cars isn't what it used to be. And this is again bad enough with the electronics, and they're always changing this and always changing that. But why? Why would you take this simple engine that's been proven over millions and millions and hundreds of millions of miles in all different vehicles all around the world that functions perfectly? What demonic force, what twisted mentality leads you to make it overhead cam and then put all of these timing chains in all of these inaccessible places? So I choked that job down, and I did it. And it went on down the road. But it tainted my vision. It tainted my view towards being a mechanic, something I always loved. So I get another one, let's say maybe a year later, I get another one come in. This is another one that they had bounced around town. They'd gotten all different kinds of crazy prices on it. And I just undercut the next guy just to get the job in and out. And I did it. And it wasn't that big of a deal because I'd already been through it. So I knew everything that had to be done. But still, I cursed it. It was like, this is ludicrous. And at this point, I was really starting to lose my love for being a mechanic, for working on regular cars. Sent it down the road. Maybe a year, 2 years go by, and another one comes in. And I priced the job, and I priced it high, right? Because I go, well, if I'm going to suffer through this, I got to get paid for it. And they were more than happy to give me the money. So I open the hood to start the job. Now normally when I jump into a job, I dive into the job. Like I'm just there, okay? But this time I couldn't do it. I opened the hood and I just looked at this thing. And I said, nah, I'll go have lunch, right? And I'll come back. I never got back to it that day. The next morning, I was like, all right, let's get to this thing. Let's get this 4.0. I open the hood and I look at it. I can't do anything with it. I just can't. I can't bring myself to work on this. All right, maybe I need to do something else. So I played with some hot rod stuff or whatever I did, played with some motors, like whatever, I don't even remember, but just to clear my head. And I said, I'll get away from this. I'll get back to it. Well, like now several days has gone by, and this thing is just sitting there with the hood open. And every time I walk past it, I look at it, and I don't have the will to work on it. It's like, I know the job, I've done the job, it's, you know what I mean? But I don't have the will to work on it. It's just this complicated, nonsensical, black mass of evil under the hood of this frickin' Explorer. And at that point I realized I was done. I can't do this anymore. I can go no further. I farmed the job out to somebody else, paid for it out of my own pocket, gave it back to the customer, and that was it. I moved on. At that point I says, you know what, old cars always did me good. I'm going to go back to doing nothing but Mopar stuff. Old vintage Mopar stuff. So I started buying up, we had a bunch of, when I moved here, there were a bunch of Mopar guys in the area, small Mopar guys, and they had, parts, right? They'd have a shed full of parts, garage full of parts, storage rooms full of parts. So one by one, I went around and I bought each of them out. And I stuffed it all into a shop and I started dealing parts online. And that was really good. And for 10 years, I sold parts online. It was fantastic. I bought a tractor trailer load of stuff that came from Petty Enterprises. I made a fortune off of that. It was all of their short track stuff from the 70s and the early 80s. So it was a great score. And I did nothing but sell parts. And I says, you know what? Maybe it's time for another shop. So I moved into another shop. This one was called Mid-South Mopars. So I had the parts business going, and that's bringing in cash. And he says, and I keep turning away work. I keep turning away people who want me to do engines and do the front end on this. And so I says, you know what? Fine. So I move into this shop, and for a couple of years now, I'm thrilled. We're doing this thing called Mid-South Mopar, and the world is great. And regular auto repair has drifted into the distant past. In the meantime, I still maintained my home shop, because the home shop represents freedom. It represents my ability to just stop whatever I'm doing if I don't want to do it anymore, and just come back here. Because I know if the world implodes tomorrow, I just put the word out on the street that, yeah, I do some work out of the house, and the next thing you know, word of mouth, word of mouth, word of mouth, and I have a line of customers again. So that's why the home shop is so important. And you notice, even though I've got the shop here, I still haven't touched anything from the home shop. Like, for instance, the earth could open up and swallow the shop that we run, this channel out of, and I wouldn't skip a beat because I've got all my stuff here to just start right back over again. It sounds crazy, right? But it's my Social Security. So Mid-South Mopars is doing good. Everything's fine, and the landlord ends up selling the building out from under me. With that, we started a podcast, because I says, before I go back to fixing cars again and deal with things like that overhead cam 4.0, let's try media again, because I did good with magazines. Let's try media again. So we did a couple of podcasts. That didn't work out, and then we decided to take a crack at YouTube. And 4.5 years later, here we are, and YouTube's been pretty good. And my home shop is still waiting for me, so when YouTube finally runs its course, whenever that happens, I can still come back here and do my thing. So that is how an engine, the 4.0 V6, changed my life and brought me to where we are today. Crazy story, right? I'll see you tomorrow.